In the last few hundred years, the notion that a Malkavian could ascend to the seat of princedom has often been considered absurd among the younger kindred of the Camarilla. The clan of the mad, desperate, and deluded are seldom given much respect, and they tend to be considered too unstable, too weak, or simply lacking that je ne sais quoi that Ventru or Toreador princes seemingly radiate from every pore. Yet there are a few odd cities still under the rule of the Clan of the Moon, and historically these kindred have had plenty of opportunities to prove their competence in ruling their domain. Ancient Rome certainly had its share of Malkavian patricians, but later on even larger cities such as Morocco, Athens, and Hamburg have seen Malkavians on their thrones. In the modern night, Berlin, Miami, and Boston have all been under the rule of Malkav's brood, although with recent events it's hard to know who is and is not in charge anymore. Indeed, while their clan curse may sometimes be outright debilitating, getting in the way of even the most mundane of knightly tasks, Malkavians somehow seem to survive, thrive, and even grow old both within and without the ivory tower. One must then conclude that despite their struggles, a notable number of them still maintain enough sanity to survive the knightly jihad, or more. Malkavians may be unreliable, fickle, and sometimes difficult to understand, yet these are not necessarily flaws if wielded correctly. As we know, the only measuring stick used amongst the undead in terms of rulership is power, in all its forms, and the power the Seers wield over the minds of both mortals and undead alike make them a dangerous enemy and a powerful ally. A Malkavian who has had countless generations to come to terms with their own inherited insanity may know exactly when to suppress it, or let it control them wholly. Some princes may show no outward sign of their curse, others may disappear for days, weeks, or even longer before returning as if nothing had ever happened. Some show the grace of a toreador with appreciation for the finer things in life and unlife, while others may smear viscera across their chambers, convinced that they may predict the future through the guts and blood of their victims. Some may pose as other clans, their true nature obscured to all but the most perceptive of kindred, while others make no effort to hide their madness, sharing it with their subjects freely. The city of Visby, located on the island of Gotland outside Sweden's coast, is run like clockwork. It is a city heavy with tourism, famous for its many medieval ruins and having served as a crucial center of trade in the Baltic Sea for hundreds of years. And the city sees almost 1 million visitors per year, many coming to participate in the medieval week where nightly tournaments, jesters, theater, and drinking is commonplace. Due to the city's limited native population, relatively small size, and high turnaround for tourists, the prince, Margaret, seems to know and predict close to everything taking place within her domain. Although her duties keep her occupied for much of the night, she still regularly holds court once a month to meet with her Primogen and their childer, announce decrees, or welcome guests to her city. There has not been a blood hunt declared in her domain for at least the last 200 years, but there are whispers that any troublesome kindred who visit Visby are rarely heard from again. Her seneschal, Eric, tends to most matters involving the Primogen of her city, as well as clerical matters, and her sheriff, Albrecht, likewise patrol the streets and keep tabs on all who have been given permission to visit, knowing each face by name and clan. Feeding restrictions are harsh, but fair, and while there are a few native vampires who reside within the city's ancient walls, they have all long since accepted Margaret's rule. The Primogen is often jokingly referred to as Margaret's jailers, for they are vastly more active and visible than the prince herself, but ever since the Bruja Primogen vanished without trace in 1932, they have all gone to great lengths never to make any statements in opposition to the prince's decrees. The truth of the matter is that there is only one kindred of power within Visby's walls, and it is Margaret. In 1932, she killed not only the Bruja Primogen, but all other members of the council in the city, all in the span of one night, and she has since then effectively played the role of prince, seneschal, sheriff, and Primogen, all on her own. Through a tireless and brilliant mind for order and structure, as well as an impressive mastery of method acting, she has ruled the city as a one-man orchestra for close to 100 years. And while her proficiency with the discipline obfuscate is almost absolute, she prefers to use makeup, shadows, and careful studies of her former subjects to her advantage, as this simple parlor trick confounds even the most attentive vampires. After all, who would assume that an elder of such potent blood would resort to mere human methods of disguise? Whenever she holds court, she employs the use of her only child, Olaf, as a stand-in for her, wielding him like a puppet on strings, as his mind has long since been destroyed by her regular use of dominate upon him. Margaret knows that should the Camarilla focus their attention on her court too closely, she would surely be discovered. But her island has several large ports employed by traveling kindred who remain skeptical about air transport, and Margaret is more than happy to provide them harbor in exchange for trust and leaving her city's businesses alone. The childer of the now dead Primogen, at least those who still dwell in Visby, remain cowed by the events of 1932 and ask few questions. Should they be inclined to, their sires are quick to remind them of the many, many advantages that the city offers the obedient kindred, but don't ask too many questions. The city of Grissom is a notoriously uneventful little watering hole among the I-15, known primarily for having more people working in it than living there, most of them employed in the various gas stations, restaurants, and souvenir shops that dot its streets. Grissom's prince, Doug Dillinger, has been around the city since its foundation in the late 1800s, and has seen his once thriving community wither away over the years, yet it has done little to break his frontier spirit. Claiming to have been the city's first mayor, Dillinger is known far and wide as the hospitable prince. As long as you conduct yourself, you're free to stay and feed in his domain until you need to keep moving. And that's the rub. Dillinger is well aware of the risk of more vampires moving into his domain, so he has a strict one-night policy for his visitors. Dillinger is the law in his town, and he takes this responsibility seriously. In fact, for being a Malkavian, he is surprisingly lucid and consequential, something he often brings up in a jovial fashion. And many traveling kindred have left this town to continue their journey with the feeling that there's something off with the Prince of Grissom, and that they may have just caught him on a good day. Truth be told, even Dillinger feels this way, and he keeps meticulous records on his moods, the times when he is lucid, and any and all events transpiring within his domain. He is convinced that there must be a darker side to his person, as he is well aware of his clan's curse. Yet despite his many attempts to unveil a clandestine twisted personality hiding under his amicable surface, Doug has come up with nothing. Doug's self-doubt has reached a point where he has even hired private detectives to trace him and keep notes of any odd behavior, yet so far none of them have been able to come up with any kind of conclusive evidence, a fact that is driving the prince insane. He has taken to documenting everything and anything he learns about his visitors as well, all in order to have documentations available should his clan's madness suddenly manifest itself. Of course, Doug cannot allow his guests to know this, and he will treat even the most vicious Sabbat warpack with gracious hospitality as long as they promise not to cause any trouble. Was he a prince of a larger city, it is possible that the Justicars or their archons may take interest in his munificent nature, not to mention his detailed documentation of every single kindred and Cainite that has crossed the borders of his domains for the last 30-odd years. It would seem that Doug is indeed simply a kind soul, despite all his worries, something quite unusual in the world of darkness. In stark contrast to Doug Dillinger is Marissa Sinclair, the Prince of Albuquerque and the scourge of the Sabbat. Her city, being one of the larger metropolitan areas north of the Mexican border, has been forced to consistently deal with Black Hand incursions since long before it was even considered a settlement. Sinclair herself, having arrived in the city following the finishing of Route 66, which coincided with one of the largest coordinated attacks by the Sabbat in 1926, is said to have lost both of her children during the attack, and thus swore to uphold the Camarilla's laws in Albuquerque until her final death. In order to succeed with this, Sinclair has declared her city a permanent war zone, and thus has implemented rather draconian laws in order to curb any attempts by the Sabbat to invade or influence the admittedly small number of anarchs who reside in Albuquerque and its surroundings. The high rates of crime and gang violence, much of it centered around drug trafficking across the border, has likewise allowed Sinclair the excuse to sink her fangs into the APD, using the local law enforcement as her personal agents in rooting out troublemakers, as she calls them. Her argument appears sound. The Sabbat employ many of the same techniques and routes that the cartels use to smuggle narcotics and other illicit wares into the US, but her methods are often considered overkill, and the mortality rates of both criminals and police officers have been on a steady rise for many years. Sinclair does not rule through charisma or diplomacy, but rather a strong conviction of what needs to be done. She has earned the begrudging respect of her peers, who refer to her scorched earth-like approach to rooting out Sabbat as a necessary evil, and she is considered a wartime prince by her subordinates. If they thought anyone could rule the city better, she would quickly find the Primogen turning on her, but for now they are stuck under her thumb. Meanwhile, Sarah Roslin, a particularly vicious Sabbat Malkavian anti-tribu, has declared Albuquerque as her domain, Sinclair her mortal enemy, and has succeeded in establishing several small cells of individually operating war bands within the city limits. She aspires to become the city's first archbishop, and has a seemingly supernatural ability to spot any potential convert to her sect and snatch them up before the Anarchs or Camarilla get their claws in them. Her reputation now precedes her to the point where many Sabbat loyalists have set their eyes on New Mexico's largest city as the future spiritual capital of the Black Hand, after the fall of Mexico City, and Roslin has found herself caught up in the internal politics of the sect more than once, as veteran warriors of the Black Hand try to muscle in on their prized target. A significant number of these outsiders eventually learn their place, although those who don't usually end up targets of Sinclair's witch hunt-like purges, their inability to stay hidden their downfall. Or so it would seem, for Sinclair and Roslin are merely two sides of the same coin, one a fervent warrior of the Ivory Tower, and another a bloodthirsty and conniving Sabbat bishop. Whereas Sinclair is a firebrand of righteous fury, Roslin remains a cold-blooded, needle-sharp rogue who always seems to be one step ahead of the Camarilla. Neither of them are aware of the other's true existence, of course, and they both loathe each other with a passion. Yet in order to maintain this internal and external struggle, neither Sarah nor Marissa will subconsciously allow themselves to capture the other. Their origin can be traced back to the raid in 1926, where Sinclair, then a human, was one of the shovelheads created to attack Albuquerque. That night she diablerized her sire, who allowed it for reasons she cannot remember, and the act created within her a self-loathing so strong she could not bear to live with herself, her mind splitting in two. The two of them differ in almost every way. Sinclair would never even consider hiding herself, often putting on lavishing celebrations of victory during Elysium, and dressing in expensive gowns to taunt the invading Sabbat, equally as elegant as she is deadly. Roslin will instead operate in the shadows, her face practically unknown to even her closest soldiers, and her every move carefully calculated, and not even her greatest victories given pause for celebration. These three cases are but some of the many ways that the brood of Malkav may rule their domains. Some may be mere slaves to their whims, while others may plan across decades, even centuries. One thing is for certain regardless of the case, however. Those who underestimate a Malkavian prince do so at their own peril. I would like to thank the Antediluvians, you grandchilder of Cain, for your constant support and guidance. Bambi Parsons, a leader with an unbreakable will, and Procyon, you who in abandoning your humanity have risen as a god amongst Cain's angels. The Methuselah, their lieutenants, and our masters control our every move through your timeless jihad. You are Her Satanic Majesty Danny, whose presence chills the blood. Socrates Johnson, a scholar and a masterful craftsman of stories. Loren Eason, ever vigilant for the darkest and most depraved of secrets. And Alexander Kushtaria, esoteric scholar and mentor in magecraft. We also want to thank the Primogen Council of Edward Reed, Non-God, and Beled for your diligent support of our cause. Your wisdom shall guide our progeny well. The council would also wish to propose a toast to the Elder Hunter for the services you have provided us ever so faithfully, and would likewise also bring to the attention the prospect of the Ancile Evelyn, upon whose performance the council are bid to pay heed. Naturally, all our elders, Ancile, and neonates receive our gratitude from the bottoms of our hearts. Without your support, this would not be possible. And thank you for watching. Now be careful out there, for Gehenna may soon be upon us.